This episode of Let's Dig Deeper podcast is supported by the University of Copenhagen's School of Archaeology. Welcome, dear listener, to Let's Dig Deeper, the podcast where we talk all about archaeology, history, art, and culture. My name is Annette Rathje. I'm a student of classical archaeology here at the University of Copenhagen, and in this podcast, I'm going to take you along for interviews with some of the delightful people working in the field. We're talking archaeologists, historians, professionals, and beyond. Hopefully, we'll learn more about the past in the process. And today, I'm joined by the amazing Annette Rathje. Welcome to the studio, Annette.
Thank you.
And Annette, you are lector emerita in classical archaeology from here, the University of Copenhagen. You research intercultural interactions in the Mediterranean area from the 8th to 6th centuries BCE with a focus on the Etruscans. You're also interested in Etruscan culture and the power and meaning of images. And today we're digging into the Etruscan civilization. We're going to find out who they were, where they lived, and what they left behind for us. But before we really dive into it, let's first get to know the Etruscans a little bit. So Annette, if you had to give a short introduction to someone who has never heard of the Etruscans, what's something that you would highlight?
Well, I would highlight that the Etruscans represented an enormous civilization in the central part of Italy from around 1000 before Christ to around 50 before. That's time and place.
Yeah, I think that's really important to sort of locate ourselves in time and space. So thank you very much. Now let's dig deeper. So, let's start at the beginning. The origins of the Etruscans have long been debated. But what do we actually know about where the Etruscans came from, and when do we first begin to see them in the archaeological record? Are we already in the Villanovan period?
Well, I am amongst the persons who do not believe that the Etruscans came one day all together sailing from somewhere to Italy.
No.
That never happened. And what we call Etruscan culture is in Italy, and there was no origin. They were there. And we can perhaps see some of them in the end of the Bronze Age and definitely in the Iron Age. And Villanova culture is one aspect of Italian Iron Age culture, and there are no Villanovans. That's not a people. Villanova is a fine place, and it's centered around the sites which later was known from history from the Etruscan famous cities. So there are no Villanovans. We call them the early Etruscans.
So Villanovan is not a people, it's more like a place,
that's
actually.
Very important.
Yeah. All right. And we see this Etruscan culture then emerging in central Italy specifically.
Yeah.
So what made this region suitable for the development of Etruscan society?
I have to add that it's not only central, it's also in the north, and I come back to that, and in the south, because the Etruscans were in the middle of Italy, and that is Tuscany and Umbria, part of Umbria. And part of Marche. And it is in the Po Delta and in southern Italy around Capua and Ponte Cagnano and Pompeii.
Okay, so it's actually pretty broad. So it's not really constrained to
No,
central
it's
Italy.
not constrained, but what we call Etruria proper is Tuscany. And what I said, it is because Augustus, the emperor, made Etruria his 7th region, and he just put it where we think the Etruscan culture is.
So he made a border for them,
He made a border from the Tiber to the Arno.
Yeah, okay. So before that, really, there wasn't sort of a limit to where the Etruscan people were.
No.
All right. But from quite early on, the Etruscans were in contact with other Mediterranean cultures, such as the Greeks, for example. So what do we know about these early interactions, and how did they shape or influence Etruscan culture, or vice versa?
We know a lot because we have to think about the movements of the peoples in the Mediterranean. These movements are from the Bronze Age. We know them from the Bronze Age, and they never stopped sailing. And the period in question here is the period, so-called colonial period, where the Greeks and the Phoenicians and other people moved around to settle somewhere else. And this movement is central for the Etruscans. And the Etruscan is a central place in all this because of the position in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But that's not only a geographical point. It is also because of the resources of the region that you asked for, because the resources were minerals.
Okay.
And a very good land for agriculture and a lot of forests, which are very important for the makings of ships.
So very fruitful land, actually.
Yes, very fruitful land. And in fact, we see Etruscans all over the Mediterranean. It has been studied mostly in the West. And you must remember that the Western Mediterranean was mostly occupied by the Phoenicians.
Yeah.
Apart from the original people, of course. And we can see now that the Etruscans arrived on the other side of Gibraltar.
Okay.
So you must imagine them going to Portugal.
Yeah.
And what we see also is a very large impact on the trade with France. And that has been studied recently from shipwrecks, because we find Etruscan ships with goods that they exported to France.
So they were merchants.
They were merchants. Apart from agricultures, they were merchants and they were miners. And what is the most important is that there were no Greek or Phoenician settlements in Etruria, in the Etruscan areas. So these people were strong enough to keep the others out of their own territory.
Yeah.
But still, there was a big exchange of goods and peoples and ideas. Always ideas, and also, we think, intermarriages. So that is perhaps one of the explanations of some foreign things happening in Etruria, that we can study the intermarriages. But such things cannot be studied for the early period when they didn't write their names.
No. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But there was cultural influence, between, for example, the Etruscans and the Greeks, right?
A lot. And you must remember that Greece is not only Greece proper. It's also southern Italy. Southern Italy and Sicily is Greek.
Yeah,
and
we're part of Greece.
They went as north as to Ischia, the Isle of Ischia in the Bay of Naples, and Cumae, the first two settlements of Greeks in Italy.
Yeah.
And these people, the Greeks, brought the alphabet to the Etruscans.
Yeah.
And then the Etruscans brought it to Europe, to a lot of people.
That's so interesting how that sort of spread, right?
Yeah,
and
so
the chain effect of that.
And then I want to say that we can see a lot of influence and exchange between Greeks and Etruscans. And this has been studied in a way that the Greeks were the best and the Etruscans were only imitators of Greek styles and art and crafts.
That's so deliberate in a way, yeah.
It is false, and what they are is best expressed in, I think, the term they were the best clients. And in fact, you can see later that the import of Greek vases from Attica, from Athens, was big, that we say that about 70% of all Greek vases were found in Etruria.
That's so interesting.
Think of that.
That's a large amount.
It is. And 90% of the big painters' vases were found in Etruria, in the tombs of Etruria.
So they both exported goods, but they also imported cultural goods.
Oh, yes, they imported. They loved Greek ceramics. And we have found out that they also asked for specific motives. And you can follow today how the Etruscan preferred certain motives to others to get it to fit their beliefs and their religious thoughts.
Yeah, so they adapted it to their own.
They adapted it. There are some people thinking that we can find Etruscan craftsmen in Athens, in Keramaikas.
Okay, so they went there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
What, to learn the craft or
To do something there. Yeah, they knew how to make ceramics already, but
Yeah,
they
but
learned.
decoration techniques or
Yeah,
stuff like
but
that.
they learned a lot from the Greeks. Another aspect of the Greek influence in Etruria is we see an immigration from Ionia.
Okay.
When the Ionians were pushed away from the Persians in the archaic times, many fled, and a lot of people came to Etruria, and of course they came to other places like Massalia, which is founded by the Phocaeans in around 600. And we have a lot of cooperation between Etruscan and Greek craftsmen. We can follow it in the ports because Etruscan towns and cities had ports, many of them. And for instance, Cerveteri had 3 ports and Tarquinia had 1 port.
Is that a lot for antiquity for the cities of
3?
that size? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Okay.
Normally we have 1.
Yeah. Okay, so they were really big on international trade, you can say.
They were. That's to say it. And you must imagine these foreigners living, it was open societies. They were living close to each other and they learned from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was sort of everyone could interact with each other. There was no restriction on that. Yeah. One of the ways that we know a lot about the Etruscans is from their tombs.
Yes.
And why are Etruscan burial contexts so central to our understanding of their culture?
I think there are 2 good answers to that. One answer is, well, they found a lot of tombs many years ago. And when they found these tombs, they were so shocked at the sight of all the goods in the tombs. Because the Etruscans believed in life after death. They believed you should have all your things around you and rituals should be done properly, and the funeral was a very, very important occasion. And the tombs represent all this together. So the Etruscans never had laws against putting a lot of stuff in the tombs. Never. And I think that is one of the answers, or the 2 answers to what you ask for.
Yeah. So we know because they sort of made time capsules in their tombs,
right? Yes, they
right?
made time capsules and they made room.
Yeah.
They made these enormous tombs with a lot of space to not only the body but all the goods.
Yeah.
And they made proper necropolis. It was a city of the dead, and sometimes the city of the dead seemed more spectacular than the city
of the living. Yeah, that's interesting because the amount of effort put into sort of sending a deceased person off in the best way.
Exactly.
All right, but the Etruscan tombs are also famous for their wall paintings.
Yes.
And we see a lot of different scenes in these tomb wall paintings. What kind of scenes do we see? What do they tell us about Etruscan society, beliefs, religion, everyday life, stuff like that?
Well, they tell a lot, but I will say that you have always to be careful when you study images. And these paintings are one of the biggest corpus of ancient imagery before Pompeii. You must remember that. And what are they? How can you look at them? Are they real? Are they realistic, these paintings? Is it just a manual to how they lived? Or are they ritualistic? Or are they symbolistic? So I would say that studying the paintings, you get to feel that they are all 3 things. So we can gather a lot, but still we must not take them for granted.
No.
That's very important. And that's why we still bother with these paintings, and every time we find a new tomb with goods inside is the best luck at all. Because we must remember that the room was meant for the body and the goods. So the paintings has to be seen in its whole context with these goods and the funeral. But to your question, one of the most important motive is the banquet. You see people at table lying, men and women at the table, served by some people, and together with the banquet you see dance and music. And we know from the written sources, which are not Etruscan, but Greek and Roman, we know that the Etruscans loved music and they played music to everything. Aristotle mentioned that the Etruscans played music when kneading dough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even like in everyday settings, music was sort of part
and
of
the
it.
most funny thing about that is that from Oviedo, we have the paintings in a tomb where you actually see music and someone mending.
Oh, really? So
Yes.
so it's like displayed that like
It's
the music
displayed.
accompanied everyday
It
activities.
is displayed.
So they were really big fans of festivities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So the banquet scenes, what do they mean in the funerary context? Because is it that like the Etruscan imagination of what the afterlife is like, a long big banquet?
It could be. It's one long banquet.
Yeah.
And it is also the gathering of the family, because the family meant a lot to the Etruscans. And family is in the extended version.
Yeah.
It's the household
So it's
family.
everyone.
Yeah. And you see that later, the paintings are mostly from the archaic period, but you see it later in tombs when they write their names of the participants of these, that it's the whole family gathered, various generations
Right, so they
gathered.
list all of
So
them.
it's the banquet of the ancestors. And when you are dead and you live in another world, you become an ancestor. So in a way, they are divine.
Interesting. So this sort of once you die, you pass into sort of a new stage of life in a way.
You come to another life in another place.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, this is wonderful. This happening must be something very nice to people, joyful. And in fact, all the early graves are very joyful.
Yeah.
Very joyful.
Yeah, so death wasn't necessarily like a big sad ending for the Etruscans. Yeah. But the Etruscans weren't just tomb builders, they also built thriving cities. And you've mentioned some of them, places like Tarquinia, Vulci, or Cerveteri. So what characterized an Etruscan city? And did they differ from Greek or Roman cities?
Well, they differed in one way, that they didn't use marble.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So we have no marble buildings, neither marble sculpture in Etruria.
What material did they use then?
They used tufa stone and they used wood, and they decorated their buildings with painted terracotta. So we can see the cities that we have not so much left of these cities because of the situation that many of the Etruscan cities are actually below Roman, medieval, Renaissance, modern cities.
Right.
Like Florence, like Bologna, like Mantova.
So you can't excavate them properly.
No, you cannot.
Right.
Oviedo.
Where is that place today, Oviedo?
Oviedo is in Umbria.
Okay, but have we excavated?
We have excavated the tombs around the city, and we have excavated some sanctuaries, and you can go down under the city, and you can find places where there were altars, and beneath the churches there are temples.
Okay, interesting. So sacred places remain sacred.
Sacred places remain places.
Yeah.
And Oviedo is a very interesting place because we haven't said that there's no Etruscan state. They were independent cities. In a modern way, you will say city-states.
Yeah, sort of equivalent to the Greek polis.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And different from Rome.
Yeah, not as sort of all interconnected, organized.
No, Rome becomes a state.
Yeah.
And the Etruscans were defined as city-states. And I was telling about Oviedo. Oviedo is supposed to be a place where all the cities met. And there was a sanctuary common for all the cities of Etruria.
Okay.
And therefore it's very important. And they have had an excavation, and they think, we all think that they have found the sanctuary that was common to the Etruscans. And that is because they have found so many votives and inscriptions that goes to this. It was called Fanum Voltumne. That means Voltumne's sanctuary.
Okay, right. So it was sort of like a common area for the Etruscan leaders, I suppose, to get together in case there was anything they needed to figure out.
They could.
But what did Etruscan cities contain? Because, I mean, when you think of a Greek city, you think maybe there's like a theater, an acropolis, an agora.
There was, in the Etruscan city, there was the place, normally in many cases on top of a hill, away from the coast, not at the coast. There's one only city at the coast, that's Bologna.
Okay.
That is the place with all the big mining industry of Etruria. They were about 6 or 7 kilometers from the sea. Therefore, they had the harbor there. But we have found in these cities sanctuaries, and in some examples, we have also houses. But we have not civic spaces. Yeah. We have no agora. We have no forum.
No.
But we have roads. A very good example is the road that goes from Cerveteri to Pirgi, one of the harbor towns. There they have just found a quarter of buildings with roads laid out. And we have what we call palaces for the aristocracy or for the leaders in the archaic period. But you must remember it's only the foundations of these buildings.
Because it's not marble buildings, right?
We have the foundations and the roofs and the decoration, fragments of the roofs and the decoration.
Right. So it's hard to sort of make a complete picture.
You are not walking in a ruined landscape. When you come to an Etruscan city excavation, it's only
the foundations.
The foundations. And a very good example of that is the city of Marzabotto, which is outside Bologna. And it is a city of regular streets and regular houses. Mm. It's like a colony.
Yeah.
And some people call it a colony. Mm. And there you can see the whole plan. That's what left.
You can sort of make the picture out.
Yeah.
But we often hear about so-called Etruscan kings of Rome.
Yes.
Figures like Tarquinius Superbus and Tarquinius Priscus. How historical are these rulers actually, and what role did they play in early Rome? Can we talk about something like an Etruscan period of Rome?
It's very debated. And
I'm putting you on the spot.
It's very debated, and I think today we must be a little more careful. We have been very enthusiastic about the Etruscans in Rome. I think it's more like a koine, that is the same culture in Rome, in Etruria, very overlapping, and it's in the period when Rome gets bigger and get organized. And what we think they learned originally from the Etruscans were drainage, because the Etruscans were very, very good at draining and building roads. Later, the Romans made them better, even better. But still, I think they were equal. What we have is tradition of Etruscan kings in Rome, and why not?
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot prove it. You can think, well, this is a very nice myth. It's a very nice tradition. And an anthropologist would say, well, a tradition is something real. Yeah. Not all of it, but something might be real. So I would say, why not?
But we don't have like actual documentation of, or maybe we don't even have that of the other mythical Roman kings. Yeah.
No. So the whole period is a construction. So I'll keep to that. I mean, the big difference of a very similar culture is that they spoke different languages and had different religions. But still we can see and note that the Etruscans were very, very religious, and the Romans learned a lot. They say it themselves that they learned from the disciplina Etrusca, that is the Etruscan way of doing things properly. And they had together the Fanum Caeli, that is the sanctuary of heaven. They looked at heaven when they had to decide something. They looked at the sky. They looked at the birds.
For augury, right?
For auguries, exactly. They looked at the lightnings.
And like intestines of animals and stuff like that, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so they were very religious people.
These disciplines of auguration, we can move back to the
Trace
Etruscan.
Back to the Etruscans.
Yes.
later Rome properly enters the picture
Oh,
as sort
yes.
of a consolidated state of its own. And you've talked a little bit about it, but what was the early relationship between Etruscans and now the emerging, stronger Roman state? What happened when the dynamic sort of shifted a little?
Well, the Etruscans were captured by Rome, but it was a very, very long process. It started with the defeat of Veii, a very important Etruscan city, only 17 kilometers from Rome.
All right. So was that probably the closest
So
city?
that was the closest. And in fact, it was also a war about the Tiber Delta, because they had some of the delta.
Yeah.
And Rome wanted.
Because of the fruitful land again? Or
And the salt mines. And they was captured in 396. The last city to fall was Perugia in Umbria, and Perusia it was called, and that was by Octavian, the Emperor Augustus, before he became Augustus. And it was taken in 40 before our era.
So it was a very long, slow conquest.
It was a very long, slow process, and it was different in various parts of Etruria. Of course, the cities next to Rome were very influenced, and for instance, Caere, Cerveteri became friends with Rome.
Oh.
And in Rome, many very upper-class Etruscans had Roman friends. That's one thing. And up north, it was far away, and they lived their own lives. Then Rome started to make colonies along the coast, building roads and making war and so on. And the Etruscan cities were not always together. That was the missing state.
Yeah.
The Etruscan cities formed friendships and
alliances
and enemies among themselves.
So they were disunited, sort of.
They
didn't
were
have
disunited.
a united front against the Romans.
Exactly.
Oh, so because of that, that's why Rome could gradually.
Yeah, but still, we must think that in the cities, one class might be very Roman friendly and others not.
Right, so even among them there would be differences as well.
Exactly. And what happened in the last time, in the last century before, was that the Etruscans took the wrong part in the Civil War.
Okay.
And taking the wrong part in the Civil War, that made the last stroke.
Okay, so it was sort of like a series of bad decisions, really.
Yes.
That led to it.
Yes.
All right, but even though it ended with the eventual Etruscan defeat, I guess you can say, the Etruscans are still sort of described as having had this major influence on early Rome, if not in a direct way, then in a softer cultural way.
Yes, exactly.
So what are some of the most important areas where we can see this influence? I heard one time that the toga was an Etruscan thing that the Romans took, but stuff like that. Is there examples like that?
The toga, yes, it is an evolution of the tebena, the Etruscan mantle. What we can see is the symbols of power. The symbols of power of the Romans were definitely from Etruria. And we are talking about the litus and the axe and the fasces and the sella corulis, the ivory chair, folding chair. All these signs we find in the tombs of the 7th century BC in Etruria amongst the upper elite. And they belong together to express the power of the elites, and you get also representations of these persons.
Right, yeah. So in that way, the Romans take Etruscan symbols and adapt them to their own lifestyle. Yeah, that's interesting. We sometimes talk about the end of the Etruscans. I'm putting this in quotes. But was there really such a sudden end? I mean, we talked about this very long conquest.
There was not a sudden end.
It must have been more like a gradual assimilation, right?
Exactly. And when people stop talking Etruscan, writing Latin, talking Latin more and more, it's the end.
Yeah, the power of the language.
Yeah. The power of the language, I think. And then the shift in religion when people start
converting to the Roman way of... But the thing you mentioned about the language is also so interesting because there are these tales of like high-standing Roman senators and even emperors who are so fine they talk a little bit of Etruscan.
Oh,
you
yes,
know?
Claudius, exactly.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book about the history of Etruria.
So Etruscans became this sort of storied mythical people already a few generations, maybe even after.
Well, they were something you talked about also before, exactly when you think about Herodotus, who wrote in his history that the Etruscans came sailing from the east one day. But still, they were mentioned.
They lived in the common imagination in a
Yes.
way. Yeah. What happened to their cities and their cemeteries and
Well,
these places?
it just got emerged by the Romans.
It just got taken over.
Yeah.
And that was it for the Etruscans.
Yeah, then there's a long story afterwards. They knew about it because in the Middle Ages they read the Greek and the Latin sources, and they knew that there were Etruscans, and they found something that they thought were Etruscan. But the Etruscans really got a highlight in the Renaissance period, because people found some things. We can imagine one of the most famous Etruscan bronzes, the Chimera from Arezzo, another town in Umbria. And this piece, number 3 in the Museum of Archaeology in Florence, was owned by the Medici family. And the Medici family named themselves Dukes of Etruria.
Okay, really?
So Etruria became a political argument, and it became an argument in the city-states of Italy, again, because they could say who are against Rome, the Pope, and so on. And you see that very clear in Florence.
So there's this whole afterlife of Etruscan
and there's
reception.
Another very funny afterlife that has been studied in recent years, and that is the study of the Etruscans in the years of the making of modern Italy, in the middle of the 19th century, because, again, it was understood that Etruria was not only Tuscany, but more of Italy, and it was again against Rome, against the Pope.
So it became politically relevant again.
So it became very relevant.
That's really fun. I think that's a good way to sort of sum it up, in that the impact of the Etruscans was felt for centuries after. And Annette, we're reaching the end of this episode, but I have one last question before I let you go, and that is, if listeners should take one key takeaway about the Etruscans after listening to this episode, what do you think everyone should know about this culture after hearing us talk today?
I think they should know about Etruscan paintings, because they are so unique, and it's so important, and it's so important that we take care of them.
Yeah? All right. So, listener, I hope that after this you're going straight to Googling an Etruscan painting, maybe even going to your closest museum to have a look at one of them. But Annette, thank you so much for joining me in the studio here today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. It has been such a pleasure for me to stay here.
And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in to this episode of Let's Dig Deeper. I hope you've learned lots and that you're planning your next trip to Italy. I know I am. If you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, you can reach us at letsdigdeeperpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is letsdigdeeperpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And please rate us 5 stars so that we can reach more people. You can find us on social media under the name Let's Dig Deeper. I'm Zinat Haroun and I've been your host. You can reach me on Instagram at @z_archaeology. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time, where we will dig deeper into another topic. Bye!